Today's reading is from Ruth chapter 4. Boaz went out to the town gate and took a seat there. Just then the family redeemer he had mentioned came by. So Boaz called out to him, "Come over here and sit down, friend. I want to talk to you." So they sat down together. Then Boaz called 10 leaders from the town and asked them to sit as witnesses. As Boaz said to the family redeemer, "You know Naomi, who came back from Moab. She is selling the land that belongs to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should speak to you about it so that you can redeem it if you wish. If you want the land, then buy it here in the presence of these witnesses. But if you do not want it, let me know right away, because I am in line to redeem it after you." The man replied, "All right, I'll redeem it." Then Boaz told him, "Of course, your purchase of the land from Naomi also requires that you marry Ruth the Moabite widow. That way, she can have children who will carry on her husband's name and keep the land in the family." "Then I cannot redeem it," the family redeemer replied, "because this might endanger my own estate. You redeem the land. I cannot do it." Now, in those days, it was the custom in Israel for any transferring a right of purchase to remove his sandal and hand it to the other party. This publicly validated the transaction. So the other family redeemer drew off his sandal as he said to Boaz, "You buy the land." Then Boaz said to the elders and to the crowd standing around, "You are witnesses that today I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. And with the land I have acquired Ruth, the Moabite widow of Mahlon, to be my wife. This way she can have a son to carry on the family name of her dead husband and to inherit the family property here in his hometown. You are all witnesses today." Then the elders and all the people standing in the gate replied, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make this woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, from whom all the nations of Israel descended. May you prosper in Ephrath and be famous in Bethlehem. And may the Lord give you descendants by this young woman who, like those of our ancestor Perez, the son of Tamar of Judah." So Boaz took Ruth into his home, and she became his wife. When he slept with her, the Lord enabled her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. Then the woman of the town said to Naomi, "Praise the Lord, who has now provided a redeemer for your family. May this child be famous in Israel. May he restore your youth and care for you in your old age. For he is a son of your daughter-in-law who loves you and has been better to you than 7 sons." Naomi took the baby and cuddled him in her breast, and she cared for him as if he were her own. The neighbor woman said, "Now at last Naomi has a son again," and they named his name Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the grandfather of David. This is a genealogy record of the ancestor Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, and Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David.
The titled the sermon this morning, The Redeemer and That Other Guy, because there is a disposable character in this story. He, in terms of the story as a story, he has a sort of important place as kind of the opposite of Boaz. But in terms of, the actual life story that Ruth and Naomi and Boaz were living, this guy was there for a few minutes and then out of there, and Boaz stuck around, obviously. So he's a disposable character, and the author of the story makes a point of not telling you this guy's name. And there's actually a lot of the word name is used many times in chapter 4, and so it's an important word, and this guy is unnamed. When my mom's brother Jim was a child, he won a beauty contest, which I find kind of funny because when he was older and I knew him, he was not a very attractive looking guy. And since they lived in Southern California, Jim ended up getting roles as a child actor. Not big roles, he was an extra. He looked cute, but wasn't important. In his early adult years, for a little while, he played the part of a security officer in the original Star Trek series. Yeah, he was one of the red shirts, but the red shirts got killed off at a pretty fast pace. So playing a disposable character isn't really a long-term job. When he was a child, my Uncle Jim loved to make model airplanes, and in the long run, he managed to build a long-term career in the aerospace industry building scale models. So that's the end of his story career-wise. The book of Ruth has a disposable character. He actually does play an important role, as I said, but he gets ejected from the story before we even catch his name. Not only does the author of the story not tell us his name, but he actually makes a point of bringing our attention to the fact that he's not going to tell us this guy's name. I talked last week about the roles of the kinsman redeemers in Israel. Family members were called to look after each other. A family member might be called on to act as a kinsman redeemer to help his fellow family members. And there were 4 different ways in which a kinsman redeemer might be called to act. First was to redeem family property, such as fields. If his relative became poor and had to sell his property to stay afloat, a relative with the means was to buy the property being sold in order to keep it in the family. Second was to redeem family members who ended up in slavery, to buy back the slave and treat him as a hired servant. Similar concept to redeeming family property. Third was to seek justice for a murdered relative. And fourth was to marry a widow who didn't have a son in order to provide for the widow and to provide an heir for her late husband. In this chapter, Boaz redeems a field and marries Ruth, a childless widow. So we'll look at Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10 first to see what it says about marrying a widow who dies without a son, which that's Ruth's situation. It says, "If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed to the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. And if the man does not wish to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate to the elders and say, 'My husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother to me.' Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him, And if he persists, saying, I do not wish to take her, then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders and pull his sandal off his foot and spit in his face. There you have it. And she shall answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And the name of his house shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandal pulled off. I should have worn sandals today, I guess. That may seem like a strange custom to us, but it was very difficult for a woman to get by in that time and place without a man in her life, whether a father or a husband or an adult son. So it was important to provide for widows. Marrying a brother's widow is known as levirate marriage, from the Latin word for brother-in-law. Obviously, Ruth's late husband, Mahlon, had no brothers left alive. So we're looking at more distant relatives at this point. They placed great importance on the land that the Lord gave each family being passed on in that family without having a break in the line of inheritance. And though they didn't have last names, still the family name, the line of descendants was very important to them. My two oldest brothers, Jeff and Ryan, are actually my half-brothers from my mom's first marriage. Though my dad legally adopted them, they kept their last name, Alexander, in deference to their grandmother who didn't have any other grandchildren. So Grandma Dorothy Alexander's family name lives on. And Grandma Alexander was, also a loving grandmother to me, even though I wasn't actually related to her. So Ruth's firstborn son, Obed, would become the heir of her first husband, even though he was fathered by her second husband. That clear? So Obed was the son of Obed was the son of Boaz and the heir of Mahlon. But the funny thing is that in the genealogies in the Bible, Boaz is listed as the father of Obed, and Mahlon isn't mentioned. Clearly, it was possible for a man to refuse to marry his late brother's widow, but clearly it was also a disgrace for him to do so. The widow was supposed to bring the matter before the elders in the gate of the city, and if he persisted, she was to remove his sandal and spit in his face. Not a very pleasant thing. And he would thereafter have a reputation. His house would be called the house of him who had his sandal pulled off. Wonder if they painted that on the gate or something. So the widow did have some initiative in this process, at least in cases where her brother-in-law refused to do his part. What other initiative she may have had, we don't really know. Here in Ruth 4, there's no spitting in the face, but the guy who's first in line to redeem Ruth does lose his sandal. So it seems to be toned down a bit from what Deuteronomy says, but the action does happen at the city gate, just like it says in Deuteronomy. Though Ruth herself isn't there, Boaz is kind of acting as her representative. The other form of redemption we see in Ruth chapter 4 is the redemption of Naomi's land. It was the family property of her late husband, Elimelech, and if possible, it should be kept in the family. Now, the land would have been divided between Elimelech's two sons, but since both of the sons died and only one of the daughters-in-law came back to Judah and Bethlehem with Naomi, whoever gets the inheritance gets the whole thing. Naomi didn't have the ability to farm it herself, and she needed the money that selling it would bring. So if a kinsman redeemer would buy it, then Naomi would receive the value of the land, and it would stay in the family. In Leviticus 25:25, it says, "If your brother becomes poor and sells part of his property, then his nearest redeemer shall come and redeem what his brother has sold." Now, the Torah doesn't actually make a connection between redeeming the land and redeeming the childless widow. But here in Ruth 4, the widow and the land go together. You can't have one without the other. That may have been a common practice. It's not set forth anywhere else. So it appears that what is going on is that Boaz bought the land from Naomi and married Ruth. Then Ruth and Boaz had a son named Obed, who would be the heir of Ruth's first husband, Mahlon. And in due time, Obed would receive the land that Boaz bought from Naomi. I hope you followed all that. So in the end, Obed inherits the land, even though someone else, Boaz, bought it. Boaz was his father, so there you go. There are other scriptures that make it clear that the city gate was a place where legal business and official business was taken care of. But here in Ruth, we see that in action as Boaz gathers the other potential redeemers and the elders of the city and tells them all to sit down. So obviously they had seating there for this sort of thing. In verse 1 it says, "Meanwhile Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there. When the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, 'Come over here, my friend, and sit down.'" Now there's an odd phrase in there that most modern translations render "my friend." But it's literally equivalent to the English phrase "so-and-so" or "such and such." That's how it's used elsewhere in the Bible a couple times. It's a vague way of referring to someone without using their name, or referring to a thing without using its name in the case of such and such. So Boaz said, "Come over here, so-and-so, and sit down." Now, you might call someone so-and-so when telling a story to someone else, but you wouldn't call someone so-and-so to their face, would you? I think Boaz probably used the guy's name, but the author of the book of Ruth makes a point of not telling us his name, and he even makes a point of calling him so-and-so to let us know that he's being very intentional about not telling us this guy's name. So we'll call him so-and-so, since that's the closest thing to a name that he's given. He's a kinsman redeemer who refuses to redeem. So, I mean, is he really a kinsman redeemer? Not really. So-and-so, as we'll call him, has an important role in a way in that he's the opposite of Boaz. You know, there's a character contrast going on here. But so-and-so is a disposable character, like the security officers in Star Trek. You know, they get zapped by a phaser, and that's the end of it. He has a role in the story for a few minutes, and Boaz sticks around till death do us part. The potential redeemer, called so-and-so, likes the idea of buying some land. You know, oh, that sounds good. Got a little more land to farm and have to pay some money, but that's okay. But then Boaz mentions that there are strings attached. Boaz seems to go about this in a certain way because he kind of wants a certain result. He wants to be the one to marry Ruth in the end. It's not entirely clear why marrying Ruth would endanger the man's estate, but it doesn't really actually matter. What is clear is that so-and-so is concerned about his own affairs, not the affairs of his extended family. He's concerned about his own little kingdom. And Boaz is concerned for the poor and for his extended family, and he sees Ruth not as a poor foreign widow, but as a woman of noble character who has come to seek shelter under the wings of the Lord. So while so-and-so is concerned about his own little kingdom, Boaz becomes the great-grandfather of King David, who founds a kingdom, a big kingdom, not a little kingdom. David fathers a great dynasty of kings and becomes the ancestor of the Messiah, whose kingdom shall never end. So what did so-and-so miss out on by taking a selfish approach to this? Just thinking about his own affairs. Boaz generously provided for the inheritance of Obed, while so-and-so was concerned about his own inheritance. In chapter 3, Ruth uncovered Boaz's feet and laid down at his feet. She asked him to spread the corner of his garment over her. Doing so would symbolize entering into a covenant of marriage, but also then from a physical perspective, in the process of covering her with the garment he was using as a blanket, he would also cover up his own feet again. So Boaz ends up with his feet covered, but so-and-so loses his sandal. Boaz ends up with a spare sandal. I hope it's his size. When Boaz was faithful as a kinsman redeemer and bought the land and took Ruth as his wife, the elders present as witnesses blessed him, and among other things they said, "May you have standing in Ephrathah," that's the region, "and be famous in Bethlehem." Well, turns out he was famous in more than Bethlehem, but maybe their vision was a little too low. Being famous means that your name is well known, and the name of Boaz is well known far beyond Bethlehem, whereas so-and-so is intentionally unnamed. And there's a lot of focus in this passage on names. So the elders said of Boaz, "May you be famous in Bethlehem." Later, the women of the neighborhood said of his son Obed, "May he become famous throughout Israel." I guess the women had a higher vision of how famous this family would become than the old men did. But their fame extends beyond Israel and certainly beyond Bethlehem. This is the family line of the Messiah, the King of Kings, before whom every knee shall bow. The time of famine and death has ended, and there was a good barley harvest and a good wheat harvest. Now the grain harvests are done, and it's time for a different kind of harvest, a different kind of fruitfulness. The time of redemption has come, and a family line that seemed to have come to a dead end is renewed and revived, and a new harvest has come from the family of Elimelech, the family of the guy whose name means God is King. We live in a fallen world, and bad things happen all the time, all over the place. Naomi's husband died, and then her 2 sons died. But the tragedy of her story was redeemed. The Lord began doing new things in her family. Naomi had been broken by what happened to all the men in her family. But the Lord can step in to break broken situations and redeem them. making something beautiful in the wake of loss. He gives beauty for ashes. He may not restore our situation to what it was, but he restores us to new life inside. Boaz stepped into the story as the Lord's agent. And every step of the way, he went above and beyond what the Torah required to take care of his relatives. Boaz was not merely obedient to the Torah, he was obedient to the Lord who gave the Torah. He obediently redeemed his family members out of their desperate situation, and Boaz's obedience and redemption led to fruitfulness and blessing, not only for him, but also for Naomi and Ruth. Naomi's family had come to a dead end, but the Lord brought Boaz into the story to bring redemption and new life. A new baby in the family, but also new life in the hearts of Naomi and Ruth. Have you been redeemed? How has the Lord redeemed you? Redemption leads to fruitfulness and blessing, as it did with Boaz. When we let him, the Lord can move in the midst of broken circumstances and be with us and renew us within in the midst of the outward brokenness. Without his redemption, broken circumstances could break us. But with the Lord's work of redemption, we can be made new and restored in the midst of trouble. Psalm 23, 4-5 says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. The Lord's greatest work of redemption is to save us from our sins. Sin enslaves us, and we cannot escape. Much as a kinsman redeemer might buy back a relative of his who had become a slave, Jesus, our great Redeemer, has paid the price with his own life to purchase our freedom, that we may not be slaves of sin, but that we may be his servants, and he is the most gracious of masters. All who put their faith in him can be redeemed, can be set free from slavery. But he is at work to redeem us in big ways and in small ways also. He is at work to eternally save those who put their trust in him, but he is also at work in our lives daily as we come to him. He is at work to renew and restore us within. He is working still to redeem his people. So what are the big and small ways in which he's redeemed you? Does anyone want to share? Or you can also ask questions or make comments. So, Obed was born as a result of Boaz's obedience, and Obed is in obedience. So there you go. I just picked up on that while you were talking. Obed means serving. Why they called him that, I don't know, but they did.